everybody. And many people who follow me know that I'm a Pontiac guy. Like, I love Pontiacs, thanks to my dad, and we've got a 78 Trans Am with a 455, the old architecture. But getting to talk with John about his time with Pontiac Motor Division has been amazing. And John, you've made your way over to this portion of this studio, and you've had such a great career in so many different areas. But we're going to focus right now on something that went down in the early 80s that a lot of people probably remember, but do not have any idea what happened behind the scenes, and more importantly, I think for our conversation, how an OE manufacturer relied upon the aftermarket to accomplish a major goal in a short amount of time. Tell us a little bit about it.
This is really interesting. This is 37 years ago, and this was June of 1983. Bob Dorn, who was our chief engineer at the time, gave me a call and said, John, we're going to be the pace car in 1984 with the Fiero, and I'd like you to build the cars for that. I said, man, that's great, that's cool. So the next deal was USAC was over Indy 500, and Roger McCluskey was the tech director of the program. So I called Roger and I said, Roger, what are the requirements? And he said, oh, it's not bad. You just got to go 125 miles an hour and you got to stop in 500 feet. And I hung up the phone and went, oh my gosh. You couldn't, if you dropped a Fiero out of a 747, it couldn't go 125 miles an hour. So now that we knew the requirements, what do we need to do it? Well, there was a fellow Paul Vanderlee of Vanderlee Engines. Paul had been doing port work, design work from the flathead days clear up to Top Fuel. So I contacted Paul and said, look, we have this project and I'd like you to be involved. I want to send you a stock head and you tell me what we need to do. Now the other thing is I needed the factory engine was 110 horsepower. I needed 220 horsepower to get to the mile-an-hour requirement. So that meant a new head, a new block, new crank, rods, pistons, everything.
And
okay,
let's jump in right there. A lot of people remember the Fiero, and it depends on who you are as to how you remember it. That car broke a lot of ground for technology with its space frame, removable body panels. It was mid-engine. The very beginning of its run, it was what you're describing. At the very end of its run, it was something totally different. And I think this project has a lot to do with it. How much time did you have to accomplish all of these things you just listed?
We had 6 months to get new block, new heads, new parts, and on the dyno at Paul's place. And the fortunate thing was Hoki Altakachi was the primary designer behind the car. And the one thing that he did, he made that engine compartment in the back, it could hold up to a V8. And of course he hid that because it was 5 years earlier when you start the project, before 83. And it was supposed to be designed as a economy fun car. And so by 5 years passed, all of a sudden performance is back. And so Bob Dorn wanted to use the pace car, showing that you could have performance out of this Fiero. So anyway, so we got the first head that Paul did. We put bigger valves in it, changed the ports, and a fellow by the name of Tim Peterson back at Pontiac, he cut the head up, did the drawings. This is way before AutoCAD and all this stuff. And so you're doing it all by hand and measurements. And he went over to the foundry. We built new, because we had our own foundry at Pontiac where we did the blocks and the heads. And so he got the tooling done and parts made, and it was like 3 weeks. It was just amazing what Tim did. So now we sent the head down to Paul. He ported it, did it, and meanwhile, all we had was a lightweight 4-cylinder block. And I needed a block that was heavier, bigger pan rails, better head bolts, blah, 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 blah. So another fellow who is on the team was Al Felixa. And Al Felixa was a 35-year veteran of Pontiac. He knew everybody and where every screw was. The plant that built the four-cylinder, they would build 6,000 engines a day.
Wow.
So you say, I want to run this specialty block through there, and they go, hello? So we got the block done, and I went to John Deere because I wanted a high nickel block. So John Deere produced 500 blocks, and they were to go for our racing program. Well, the next thing was, when I went to plant 55, they said, well, we want $1 million worth of tooling. That was my whole program, you know. So I said, well, wait a minute. So Al Felixa, with his 35 years, I said, Al, go over and see all the foremen, all the guys on the line, and ask them, how do we do this? Well, they found all the tooling needed. They set it up, and Al brought over 200 motorsports jackets, gave every foreman, everybody on the line. The guys came in on a Saturday morning, changed the tools, ran 500 blocks, and in the afternoon had it back to production. It was an amazing thing what Al did, and it cost me 200 motorsport jackets. So now I had the blocks. So now we had Norton Machine do the crankshafts. We used a pink connecting rod from Chevrolet and used that when we used a 6-inch stroke, so I lengthened the stroke on it. And the next thing is November 1st, Paul had all the parts at his place to assemble an engine. Well, anyway, he gets it done, and the thing puts out 235 horsepower. I'm going, 6,500. I got enough power. So I called Bob Dorn at Pontiac, and he said, nobody believes that that's real horsepower. Well, Paul, his dyno was very conservative, but they wanted it to run on the DC dyno at engineering. So he brought it up and put it on the dyno, and it made 232 on the DC. And I go, we're there. So everybody in the building was excited about going from 110 to, 234, 5 right there. So I now had an engine. Now the problem was the car. I had to put bigger brakes on it. I had to put bigger wheels, tires. I used Firebird rotors all the way around. AC Delco provided me with an electronic brake booster system. I used an electronic rack and pinion system that was in prototype on the cars. And so this thing was starting to come together. Well, all of a sudden, November 1st, I got the car ready, and I head back to Indy. Now, this was a pretty classy project. I put it in the back of a U-Haul truck to go to Indy. So we drove there, and Roger McCluskey, we showed him the car, and we had to perform. So it was only 46 degrees out. The track was cold, and so I got everything warmed up, and I started running around the track, just doing some 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, and came in, and we looked over the car, and everybody was happy, and I went out and ran 125 and did the braking deal, and we passed that. Well, so everybody's happy, and I go, great. Well, I said, let me run that speed on all 4 corners. So I come off turn 4, and the transmission blows in half. The engine falls to the back. I'm going through oil, trying to keep it off the wall because it was my only test car. And then I call up Al Flix and say, Al, what other transmissions do we have? He said, 0. I'm going, oh my God, this is November 1st, this is November. So I'm driving back, and of course this is no cell phones before all that. I get to New Mexico, and I find a phone booth, and there was a fellow that built transmissions for road racing. And he had a little shop in San Francisco, and so I called him up on the cell phone. I said, I'm in big trouble. Can you help me? And he said, I'll look at it. And so anyway, I had Al air freight a 5-speed, which was our next year's transmission, to him. Next day, I'm on a plane to San Francisco, get him. I'm walking into the shop, and it's like dungy, one light bulb in it, and I'm going, and this guy's going to produce? Help me. I said, did you get the transmission? He said, yeah, it's all filleted out. So we go back and look, and I said, well, what do you think? He said, well, the synchros wouldn't make it, so we had to go to dog clutches, all billet gears. And I said, that's wonderful, but I need a transmission in 1 month. What I didn't know is he was good friends with the chief engineer at Allison Transmission, and they did the backup for him. So I called him and said, I need help. And they put 2 engineers on it with him, and 1 month later I had a transmission at the Praving Gallery. We threw it in the car. We have a 5-mile oval. I beat the crap out of it, and I was going to stay together, back in the U-Haul, and in January 3rd, we're back at Indy. Well, now it's moved up to 50 degrees. So go through the same thing. Everything lasts. Everybody's happy. We come in, and I said to Roger, I said, look, last year was the Corvette. I said, what did they run? And he said, well, they ran about 133.5 for a 4-lap average. I said, well, I said, you mind if I take this thing out and see what we can do?
Here we go.
And he said, yeah. I said, well, okay. So when I did a 4-lap average of 136.5. So that was another thing in the, for us, just personal record books to do. So when we had to have 2 other cars ready, new cars, with all the components. And we went to people like Ray Lipper at Centerline. He built the wheels for us. And you have to realize that when design studios involved, you have to get their buy-off on everything. So John Chanella, who was the designer of the car for the design side, John flew out with me to see Ray, came up with a theme for the wheel. Ray built them for us. So that was a cool deal out of the way. And then John did the scoop over the hood. And on the back of the scoop, I used a 747 wing light as a yellow light. So nobody had ever done that before, incorporating it in a scoop. So we had a lot of fun with this car. And race day, they had 13 cautions. And what you don't know is you got a guy next to you who's looking at the cars coming up. He gets a signal that there's going to be a yellow. Then he says to you, he taps you on the shoulder, and he wants you to haul butt because these guys are at 161, so you leave like a drag car. I mean, you burn the tires, you power shift first, second, third. You're out on the track so you don't get run over. Well, there were 13 cautions that day. And about the 12th caution, I'm starting to hear stuff. I'm worried that something's going to come undone.
So let's take a second to dive in. You're driving this pace car.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be picked to drive the car.
Which is
Yeah,
fitting,
cool deal.
given the pro. So
Yeah,
back to your
yeah.
story, you're about to get run over?
Yeah, and so anyway, we make it in, we get past the 13th run. Rick Mears won the race, which is Penske's driver, and now Roger owns the Speedway, and he's having all the pace cars redone that he won races at. So the original Fiero's being redone to top position, and it just, I was there for a month. At the end of the month, they had a big party after the thing. I was so wiped out I couldn't even go to it. Mentally, I was just shot, because if anything had happened to that car, a flat tire, anything, would have ruined what the program was we were doing for Pontiac. So that was cool, launched us into the full race program. Now, on the 4-cylinder, I just want to make a comment. During our 5 years of racing the 4-cylinder, and this is 165 cubic inches, normally aspirated, we went from that 235 up to 368 horsepower at 8,000. So it was a potent little piece.
Well, the Fiero, at the end of its run, had your fingerprints all over it.
Well,
and now the Corvette is mid-engine, so maybe you guys were onto something.
Well, it's unfortunate what happened, but the next year, the 69 Fiero, 89 Fiero, was going to have a supercharged V6, all new suspension. It would have been a killer. Our prototype was done, but the engine got closed out. The whole program got closed out.
What might have been, obviously, that was a storyline that I was tracking. We just learned so much more. And then through that project, you become the head of Pontiac Motorsports. We heard a little bit about that yesterday. For those of you watching at home, you can find those videos. But in NHRA Pro Stock, in NASCAR, taking less and doing more. Kind of like a rapscallion bunch of engineers fighting against Chevrolet and others with less budget, but maybe more desire.
Yeah, the Pontiac engineering group was a very tight group, and they just worked their tails off. And we probably had more competition between us and Chevrolet than we did us and Ford. But that's just the territory and the fun, and that drove everybody. And, you know, we did a lot with not a whole bunch of money. And it was really thankful to the aftermarket, as, let's say, Brodex ended up doing the aluminum heads for us. Then they did the V8 small block, big block, and V6. So Brodex was a huge part, and Eldebrock did the manifolds for us. I mean, we used everybody. And without their help, we couldn't. This program came together in 10 months. You couldn't do all those parts.
Well, you realized that to go through the regular channels would have just been impossible because of, you know, let's call it massive corporate red tape. I understand the reason there's checks and balances, et cetera. You go to the aftermarket people you knew so well, and they could do it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it was, they just pulled it off for us. We couldn't have done it without the aftermarket. And of course, luckily, I had been racing and doing stuff prior, so knew these people. And you know, I'd call Vic Eldebrock and say, I got a manifold I want you to reproduce for me. Send it to me. You know, I mean, the cooperation was tremendous. Yeah.
Fantastic. It's a great story. The Fiero, depending on who you are, how you look back, but hopefully now you realize that it was definitely on the right track right at the end. And like you said, performance was coming back. Now, what are we sitting by right here? Because all of a sudden, I know everybody wants to know what's going on here. To me, you know, it looks like a Fiat Topolino, but modernized for the street. No, by the way, this belongs to who?
Yeah, it's one of my latest projects. I built a car similar in 1975. And so this is my 2020 version of, and it's a Simca, which is really the same as a Fiat Topolino, but it was built in France. And so I have a LT1 direct injected. It's stroked to 411 inches, has an 8-speed automatic, independent suspension all the way around.
Wow.
And so it's a fun little car.
So as much as you went through the process of building, designing, panicking a little bit to make a deadline for the Indy 500, all of that, you're still putting yourself through that, designing and building.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I got a well-equipped home shop to do stuff.
And so this is your personal cruising around?
Personal fun, yeah. So this, I've had this car to the wind tunnel, and we are hoping when we go back to racing that we can run the mile, and it'll be somewhere around 216, 17 miles an hour. So, and
You can go 217 miles per hour in this, John?
Yeah. Well, I hope. That's why you went to the wind tunnel, because the wind tunnel shows you. I had to build a bunch of panels and stuff so it didn't take off.
That is a very good idea. So what would you say for folks out there? I'm always looking for lessons, people with machine shops and aspirations, people who are connected into the automotive industry. What are the ultimate lessons from this project that you went through?
Well, I think it's anything. If you're determined enough, want to put the hours in, you can accomplish anything. And you're going to run into some big bricks, but you learned how to go around them.
I love the fact
challenge.
you were coming down after success, and you couldn't even enjoy the big victory party.
Right. That was, yeah, my wife wasn't real happy at the time.
No, but I know what people really want to hear. As much as they love listening to us, they would probably love to listen to this car. Can we fire it up?
Sure.
All right, you get in there, and I am going to tell everybody who has made it possible for us. Wait for my cue, John, because I'm going to talk about some very important people like the folks at Rottler. Now, obviously, this whole thing, we're talking about machining and machines. Folks at Rottler stepping up big time, but as well as Morel Lifters. Ed Morel and, of course, John working together for lifters. And Ed, thank you very much. Morel Lifters doing a great job. And these are companies that when you need what they produce, please remember what they have done here today. Total Seal Piston Rings, the leader in ring seal technology. Total Seal just put up a brand new website. They have revamped everything. They're revamping even at this moment. They produce the Hidden Horsepower podcast that Lake and myself have been telling you about, that you can subscribe. And it's really about increasing education on ring seal. You can spend a whole lot of money on a whole lot of parts. If you don't have ring seal, it's not going to maximize what you've spent. Folks at CWT Industries, Randy has been amazing. He's got one of the lines of the week so far with an angry little baby in his hammer, but CWT doing a great job. Also Higgins Performance, thank you very much Higgins. Samtech.edu, the next generation, where are they coming from? Where are they getting their foundational education? Judson and Linda and Brian Massengill over there down in Houston, Texas area with Samtech doing a great job. Thank you so much. Edelbrock, we just heard a story about Edelbrock being on the cutting edge and being flexible. And that is so true. Yesterday we talked a little bit about how they've innovated with certain engine combinations that didn't always have the most aftermarket presence. So thank you, Edelbrock. Also, Qualcast, thank you for stepping up and supporting the Engine Performance Expo. Comp cams yesterday, Billy was insane. And I'm just meeting Billy, and of course I take a shot at his Seminoles, but that's okay. It's all in good nature. But we learned a lot about their new designs and their involvement with those record runs that Clay Millican had a couple of years ago in Top Fuel. Holly Performance, thank you very much, Holly. Speaking of electronic fuel injection, really stepping up. Folks at Melling have been involved. The videos, Lake and the guys at Melling yesterday, great stuff. That's in our archive. Elgin, thank you so much. Driven Racing Oil, very much appreciate you guys being involved. Of course, Lake being a oil guy. Promax and Turn 2 Vice from BBD Performance. You guys have stepped up, and we really appreciate you. And now, let's light it up. John, let's hear the Simca. Let's go 200. The Simca, John, that was incredible. He's flashing signs. He's having a good time. The Fiero 1984 Indy 500, it couldn't get better than that, and that's why you're watching the Engine Performance Expo. Let's kick it back over to Lake for a little bit more.